All right, everybody, it's the Ultimate Issues Hour, the third hour every Tuesday. We talk about the great issues of life. The great issues of life. I have a new way of presenting how important this hour is and how important having clarity about the ultimate questions of life. It's a vaccine against the vicissitudes of life. Once you understand things better, once you have wisdom, I think wisdom is somewhat of an antidote to fear. The author I'm going to have on for this hour writes about fear, actually, in his book. The book is Toward a Meaningful Life. As you know, I have often cited the book that influenced me the most outside of the Bible, and that is Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. That we humans need meaning more than anything except food and air. It's actually a deeper drive even than sex, as powerful as that drive is. Toward a Meaningful Life, and the author is Simon Jacobson, who is a rabbi, specifically of the Chabad movement within Judaism. Many of you have heard of the Chabad house that perhaps exists probably does exist in your city. And for 14 years, he was responsible for publishing the talks of the leader of that movement, Rabbi Menachem Schneerson, known as the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And he has taken those ideas of that remarkable man and written this book for everybody of any faith, and indeed for secular people, Toward a Meaningful Life. Simon Jacobson, welcome to the Dennis Prager Show.
Thank you so much for having me, Dennis. Beautifully stated. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. So, the crisis, as I have delineated it for so long to my audience, is a meaning crisis induced by the death of religion. I want to tell you at the outset what I tell every guest. You are 100% welcome to disagree with me. But if you don't, or you do, please react to that the great crisis is the one of meaning.
I totally agree. I don't know if I would use the word religion per se, because religion has also been maligned and stereotyped, but definitely godlessness and the sense of accountability to a higher purpose and a higher destiny. So I believe that's what you're referring to. So
yes.
I totally agree.
So what would you advise people? You have a wonderful part about fear. People are walking around now because of COVID in fear. What do you have to say to them?
Well, I'll just use a good analogy and a good anecdote, actually, of a time much worse than ours, though we don't compare tragedies. But in 1927, the previous Chabad Rebbe, his name was Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, so he was under the iron rule of the former Soviet Union, which, as we know, wanted to eradicate every semblance of Judaism in that country. And he stood up, was arrested by them, which, of course, there was no due process. They could kill him in a moment. And he refused to cooperate. So someone pointed a gun to his head and said, "Rabbi, this gun has made many people cooperate." And the Rebbe responded. He said, "This toy," that's what he called it. In Yiddish, they call it a tzatska. This toy can frighten someone that has one world and many gods, but not someone who has one God and many worlds. I think that lies the essence of fear. Fear, at the end of the day, some say it's all connected to the fear of death, the fear of the unknown. But when you have, as you said at the outset, purpose and meaning in life, which means you have something to hold on to that's greater than the moment. So yes, it may be a frightening moment, it may be a setback, it may be an unknown, as we see now during the pandemic. It's uncertain times, but you have something to hold on to. You're not just holding on to your job or money or other impermanent things, which of course don't provide security. So essentially the counterforce to fear is security. And security needs to be bound with some eternal value, something you stand for. It could be love, it could be kindness, it could be generosity, it could be religion and deeper purpose, but it has to be something more than just the world that we know that is so subject to the vicissitudes, is a good word to use, to the changes that are constantly sweeping around our lives. And it's having that anchor that is ultimately the counterforce. How to implement that is a greater challenge, but that's the principle. And every system, whether it's coming from the Bible or other systems, all end up emphasizing you need to hold on to something greater than you to counter the fear and insecurities and anxiety that results from the changing world we are in.
You go around lecturing, and so I'm curious, and you may not have an answer to this, it's fine. Do you see a change in many people? If it's just a few, then it's irrelevant. But do you see a change in many people from, let's say, I don't know how old you are, but whether you experienced it or not, from, let's say, 50 years ago? Do you think there has been a serious change?
It's an excellent question. I would respond yes. But I think change happens more incrementally, like a process, rather than one cataclysmic event. What I see is the following. I'm 63, just for the record. Okay, so 50 years is a good. I was going as a teen into my teen years and then adult years. The changes I see are both in the positive and the negative. I've seen, and now it's coming to roost, actually. I've seen that complacency that has grown out of prosperity and comforts. Since World War II, frankly, we have not had to fight for anything we stand for. So you have the average young man or woman today, or the 60s or the 70s, what do you fight for? I mean, the 60s was, a certain watershed moment in the social or civil rights of this country. But later, in the 80s and 90s, most people would tell you, I fight for make more money, maybe relationships, sexuality. I love baseball or sports and my video games or some other luxurious item. And what happened is a certain complacency sets in when you're comfortable and you take life for granted. Everything we're talking about, finding meaning, usually happens when there's, unfortunately, trauma, loss, death, some setback. And things are riding. And that's one thing I've seen get more and more apathetic. But on the other end, Dennis, I would add, I also see an upturn because people at some point get sick of being miserable. Like someone just told me a few weeks ago, how many Netflix movies can I watch? There's a certain point where you go, how much junk food can you eat? And I think that so there is, and again, not a few people, as you said, I think it's a trend that there is also a certain, what you call a spiritual opening and awakening. And the pandemic has, of course, changed things dramatically because that's really upended and disrupted everybody's schedules. So my answer is, it's like, I don't want to plagiarize Dickens, the best of times and the worst of times, but it is the best of times in many ways of our comforts and our standard of living and the ease. To press a button, you have whatever you want at your door. But it creates that type of almost spiritual vacuousness and emptiness because you don't have to fight for it. And I think that there is an upturn going on as well. So I think there's a paradox. You ask me, what do you think about that? I mean, you're sure observing this as well as I am, your own journey.
Well, I'm a bit more pessimistic than you are, but that's I have enough time to describe my views when you're not on. So I'll just I I am very worried about a generation that does not to use the biblical citation, a generation arose that did not know America, just as a Pharaoh arose who did not know Joseph. That they don't appreciate freedom. They don't appreciate the family. I think that it's a real crisis. That's why his book is important. Toward a Meaningful Life, Simon Jacobson. I want to read to you, it's an interesting thing. The book is divided into body and soul, birth, childhood, education, youth, marriage, love, intimacy, home and family, health and fitness, work and productivity, charity and wealth, aging and retirement, death and grieving, pain and suffering, fear and anxiety, and a day of life. And then that's just on man, and then there's society, and then there's God. So there's a lot here. There's a very touching little line I'd like you to comment on. You bring it here. A woman who suffered a great tragedy came to see her rabbi. The rabbi said to her, "I have no answers for you, but I can cry with you." And that's very powerful, but it's not fully comforting. People want answers when tragedy takes place. So what do you say other than crying with them? What do you have to say to them?
Yeah, one of the most difficult questions to answer, especially when you're dealing with someone who is going through tragedy. It's one thing to talk about it in retrospect after the event, and people can be a little more sober, so to speak. The reason I began with that story, I think it's vital, and then I'll answer your question, to be sensitive. I find too many people are so cocky, and they just say, "Oh, there's a deeper reason. Maybe you did something," and they jump to explanations too quickly. I think we all need pause. When in the Bible we hear when Aaron loses tragically his two children, he is silent. It says, and Aaron was silent. Silence is not avoiding the issue. Silence is recognizing the humble recognition that we're in awe of something bigger than we are. Just like we don't understand the mystery of birth, we also don't understand the mystery of death. Why some of us live longer, some less, some suffer more, some less. So I think there's an importance to recognizing that we're not God's equals where we can just say, "Okay, tell me what your plan is here." But I totally agree with you that once you recognize that, you need to move to the next level, which is to try to make some sense of it. Which doesn't mean necessarily you'll find an answer. Why did this tragedy happen? Why did I lose a child? Why were 6 million innocent Jews killed? Why any type of senseless loss? But that doesn't mean we can't make sense of what we should do about it. So we may not have an answer why, but we have an answer what to do. That this will bring out a deeper strength within me. You've seen so many great noble activities, noble is launched as a result of some loss and tragedy, and you turn the tragedy into some form of growth. So even though we may not fully understand what happened, we could say, and I've heard this from many, I have grown through it, and I don't regret what happened. I've become a greater person. So I don't know if that's an answer to the why, but it definitely is an answer to the spirit. That isn't just, okay, you're crying with me and empathizing, but you help me also grow, become a greater person. And I'll say one final thing about the why. Yeah, of course we can go ahead and start speculating why certain things happen, why bad things happen to good people. But I really believe that no matter what answer you come to, at the end of the day, you can always say, it could have been a different way. Why did it happen this way? That's why I'm careful with not becoming too rational about, especially a tragedy that's beyond. It's like a great mind cannot speak to a bleeding heart. Essentially, recognizing that.
I want you to know you won me over, because when I speak to religious writers, and I love to, obviously, because it matters to me a great deal. When they or callers to my show, and they give me reasons, or say, well, everything is for the best. It's not a line that I appreciate, because it's just not true. There are certain things that are just not for the best. Now, if that brings somebody comfort, I don't want to deprive them of it, but I'm too rational. I'm going to ask you a question I am certain you were never asked. So I'm sort of preparing you for it. I have written and said that of all the commandments in the Bible, the one I find the toughest to live by is love God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might. and I am deep believer in God. But I personally do find loving God a challenge. So I'd like you to respond to that.
I will say this. I guess we're somewhat kindred spirits because I too have challenges with that. And I'll share with you, speaking from my heart. No, I've not heard that question asked quite that way, but I have asked myself, what does it mean? And I think it goes back to a bigger question. What does God mean to me or to you or to anyone? Because that word, G-O-D, is so overused and so misunderstood. It's like almost it's almost like a routine word. God. Some people think God is this guy sitting on a throne in heaven with a white long beard about to strike us with lightning when we misbehave. You know, all the negative Woody Allen stereotypes. Others have a different meaning, and many, frankly, have never even thought about it. It's just something they heard. You know, like a child that said, the bathroom scale in my house reminds me of God because every time my mother steps in it, she cries out, "Oh my God!" You know, that's his understanding of God. Mm-hmm. So it's all really so subjective. So I want to just give a short description. I think is personal. I think, and everybody has to obviously personalize God, or else it means nothing. It becomes a meaningless word. When the founding fathers, for example, wrote, "All men are created equal and are endowed by the Creator with unalienable rights." I don't know what went in their head, but one thing is clear, that if they did not use the word creator or created equal, they could have written all men are born equal, or all men are equal. Why do they need to use creator? Because I believe they understood that if you don't invoke some higher force, whatever that force means to you, then at the end of the day, human beings can come around and say, you know what, some of us are more equal than others. So the first thing to me, God, is recognizing that you did not create yourself. You're not the giver of life. You're the recipient of life. It's a gift.
All right, hold it there, Rabbi, if you would, because we got to take a break to make the program possible. Toward a Meaningful Life is the book. Simon Jacobson, Rabbi, Chabad Rabbi, and one who was intimately involved in the works of the leader of that movement for how many years was he the Rebbe, the leader of the movement?
He assumed leadership in 1950, and he had a stroke in 1992, passed away in 1994, so it would be basically 44 years.
Yeah, wow.
But as you know, all the followers feel that he continues to lead them by his inspiration and his teachings, which live on.
Yes, that's clear. So I was telling you about my own issue about, given all the suffering on earth, that the hardest commandment for me is the loving God issue. And you said that you were a kindred spirit in some ways. So continue.
Yes. So let me conclude my my response, and I speak for myself here. So to me, God, among many things, of course, I'm not going to the theological definition, but much more the personal one, is a reality that is greater than all of us. And recognizing that is the true, humble, and honest recognition that you did not create yourself. You're not self-made. And there is a creator of life that you're accountable to, that you answer to. And I mean that in a beautiful way, as an obligation and a burden, but as a gift. And you have true purpose in life, in a sense, not because your father or mother or society told you you're important, or because you have a lot of medals hanging on your wall, or because you make a lot of money. These are all obviously mercurial. You matter because, I have a line in the book which I really like, is birth is God saying you matter. You matter because that supreme creator put you here with purpose. You're not negligible. You're not optional. You matter. It doesn't matter whether there's 7.8 billion people on earth. You have an indispensable role to play. Now, when you say love God, I would define loving God, loving that aspect. Loving the fact that I can feel I'm part of a true eternal destiny, something that will not just die with me, something that is not temporary and ever-changing, but something that I will leave a mark in this world. And I think that's worthy of loving. Now, it's true, the God and existence has plenty of pain and suffering, so there are many complaints we can have to God. But I'll just paraphrase one of my most powerful lines that I identify with when God tells Job. And Job, of course, the great eternal sufferer, documented in the book of Job. And Job says, why am I suffering? Why is there human suffering? Why can't you make it a little easier? And God, paraphrasing, God says to him, were you there when I created heaven and earth that you asked me this question? Basically, my interpretation is this. You're asking me why there's suffering. Do you ask me why there's joy? You ask me why there's death. Do you ask me why there's birth? You ask me why there's suffering and pain. Do you ask me why there is purpose in life? In other words, we always ask the question when things aren't going well. When things are going well, very few people say, hey, God, tell me why did you put this whole thing in place? And I'm not trying to minimize pain and tragedy and in any way the emotions it evokes within us. But I think any rational person has to ask themselves, one second, there's a big picture here. Yes, the pandemic has hit. It's one of the big themes I'm talking about now online and so on. The pandemic is hit, but there's a whole picture to life. Yes, people have died, but there's so many aspects of life that is a blessing. And why are we focusing only on that part that is the negative? And I'm not trying to dismiss it. And to me, loving God is loving the entirety. I would not exist if God did not put me here. I think that's pretty valuable to love. I don't know if many other things are so lovable, I should say. So that's my take on it.
Very good. What's your message, or not even message, forget message. What is your personal take on death?
Well, I remember my father died 15 years ago. Just let me take it was the first time I really encountered death firsthand, immediate family member, my father. And he was 70 years old. He wasn't young. He wasn't old. And I remember the void. I remember, like, when sitting Shiva, I realized it was so surreal. And I realized, I was my own thought at the time, that the door opens up between two realities twice in our lifetime. When the womb opens up and a child emerges from its mother's womb, and when the earth opens up to take back that body that lived whatever amount of time in this world. And I was in I would really say I was completely blown away and humbled. And almost everything else seemed to pale in comparison. So for me, death was an extremely humbling experience, like an epiphany, I would say. Epiphany, recognizing that we know so little about existence. I'll tell you, Dennis, I'm asked very often the question, where does the soul go to once someone dies? Everyone asks that question. Where'd my father go to? My mother, my cousin, my brother, sister. And I've always loss of words until I came up with some idea, which I want to share, which is somewhat like almost a humorous, ridiculous analogy, but it works. And I say, listen, imagine an imaginary conversation between a refrigerator and electricity. And the refrigerator asks electricity, where do you go to when they pull the plug? And of course, the electricity responds incredulously, what kind of chutzpah is that? What do you mean, where I go to? You're a little box, a refrigerator. They just invented you the last century or two. They figured out how to generate me electricity to energize you and refrigerate food. And now you ask me where I go, like you're the center of the universe? I go back to my regular place, which is beyond the time and space of your little box. The question when we ask where do things go is as if we are the center of existence. And now, upon death, where does the soul go to? I don't mean to be dismissive. To everyone I say this to, even who are going through serious loss, say, absolutely, of course. We're not the center. We're here. We know very little about the life we live from the moment we're conceived till the moment we die. But we sometimes convince ourselves that that's all there is. Whatever's happening in my life right now is all that matters. And to have that bigger picture of recognizing that we're part of something much greater than just the here and now. We're here part of the past. We're leading into the future. Is to me the real meditation and I've taken the emotional experience one should have, and I definitely had when I experienced death.
Does the belief in an afterlife give you comfort?
I wouldn't say it gives me comfort because to me, the afterlife is back then, It's not back then. It's whenever that happens. To me, what gives me comfort is knowing the soul doesn't die, and it continues the journey. I assume that's what you meant.
Yeah,
so,
that is what I mean. So look,
okay, so then, yes, the answer is yes.
I admit it keeps me sane, because the thought that this is all there is, with all the suffering that people endure, would be too much. So
absolutely,
yeah,
that's an enduring journey. Yeah.
So here's another one for you. I was invited many years ago to Washington, D.C., Young Presidents Organization, an international group, invited a Catholic priest, Protestant minister, and a Jew. I was the Jew. And they didn't tell us any of the questions that would be posed. They wanted spontaneous answers. Question number one, gentlemen, it was 3 men. Question number one, why did God create us? So the Protestant minister and the Catholic priest were truly eloquent, and they gave the answer that basically we are here to glorify God. My turn to speak, and I said, after what you just heard, my answer is going to sound pitiful, or just truly not meeting the criteria of excellence that you just heard. But I believe God created us to enjoy life. So you are totally free, again, Rabbi Jacobson, to say, I don't agree with you, but that's what I said.
My follow-up question to you would have been, how do you define enjoy? But that's because I, in a way, agree with you, and I would not agree, depending what you mean by enjoy. Because if every one of us determines what enjoy means, you can imagine this frivolous pleasure.
Yeah, I did not. I think yes, I did not mean it in the sense of hedonism, that it's the pursuit of pleasure. I meant it like the founders whom you quoted, and you just stopped right before the line of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Correct. Okay. So then, here's how I would phrase it a bit differently, because I wouldn't want it to be misunderstood. But if I was the fourth guy in the panel, I would say God created us in order to transform this material world into a spiritual environment, a loving environment, a beautiful world, a garden. And doing so means living life to the fullest, not through abstinence and through asceticism and through deprivation, but using everything that we were blessed with, our gifts, our talents, and yes, our pleasures, toward a higher end. And I would quote to Maimonides that the messianic better world is what? Is a world where materialism is seen as a stepping stone and a means to higher awareness, to higher consciousness. So that would probably be my way of phrasing it.
When I want to go back to the afterlife, because I tell people who have lost, especially a child, I believe with all my heart and soul they will encounter that child again. Do you?
Yes. It may not be in the form and shape that we always understand, but remember, at the end of the day, the relationship between parent and child is a soulful one, not just a physical one. And in that sense, absolutely.
I want to end with a question I have an answer to, but I want your answer. There is now a major movement across the Western world, and not just the Western world, Japan as well, of not having children. Bad for the environment, expensive, the world is filled with pain. In 1 minute, what would you say to a young couple about having children?
The greatest gift in life is being able to perpetuate our lives, our values, the spirit of what we stand for. Children is the only taste of eternity we will ever have in life. Everything we build, everything we develop, at the end of the day, will perish. And it's the children who in turn will have children, that create the ultimate transformation that lasts forever and ever. And we wouldn't be here had our parents made that choice not to have children, and they wouldn't be here if their parents made that choice. So anything beautiful in this world, is a result of our offspring. Everything in nature bears fruit. And to try to stop in any way to impede an apple tree from giving off apples or an orange tree doing the same is really, I think, a tragedy.
So it is. Are you aware of that movement, or is that not?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I see it. I don't need to go to Japan. I can tell you, I'm in New York. I mean, how many people make that choice? I deal with it all the time. I actually just last week had a conversation on a Zoom conference with a whole bunch of couples, and some of them asked that question. You know, maybe we shouldn't bring children into this world. Look what's going on. And one of them, of course, said, I was abused as a child. I don't want to bring another child. So I said to them, so don't abuse your child. Learn from the lessons and bring love. Where will there be love if there's no love to children? I mean, we're more natural place to love is to love our child. You know, anyone that's held a newborn child knows it's what it elicits in the person is the best to who we are. I mean, it's mind-boggling to me that we live in a society that it's even a consideration.
Yeah.
Obviously, there may be extraneous circumstances.
No,
right?
of course, but that's not as a philosophical issue. You've been a joy, Rabbi Jacobson.
May I just to tell my people that I'm doing a lot of programs now during this pandemic at meaningfullife.com. Same name as my book, meaningfullife.com.
Wonderful.
Please.
Wonderful. Thank you.
We are all together experiencing an unprecedented historical event with the spread of the coronavirus, the raging unrest, racial tensions, being at home quarantined, social distancing, but soulfully closer.
You'll never understand the events that are happening now.
We go from it and through it, and we become better people. We need to introduce even more light than the darkness. So now is the time. Human beings are all part of one entity. Are we fulfilling our mission? How will I use this day to bring my unique light into this world? And we can do it.